The morning of September 23, 2025, dawned with a deceptive tranquility over the South China Sea. The sun climbed into a hazy sky, casting a shimmering silvery light across the water's surface. The sea was a vast glassy expanse, appearing almost motionless under the gentle tropical breeze. From horizon to horizon, there was nothing but the deep, indifferent blue, a picture of absolute peace. For the sailors aboard the American convoy cutting a lonely path through these contested waters, it was a morning like any other. The air was thick with humidity, the salt spray a constant companion. The steady thrum of the ship's engines was the only sound breaking the silence of the open ocean. This particular stretch of sea, however, was anything but peaceful. It was a geopolitical fault line, a place where international law clashed with territorial ambition. China claimed nearly all of it as its own, a claim rejected by its neighbors and the wider world. The United States, insisting on the principle of freedom of navigation, regularly sent its vessels through these waters. Each passage was a statement, a carefully calibrated move in a high-stakes game of global power. The sailors knew this. They understood that beneath the placid surface, tensions simmered, and the potential for conflict was an ever-present reality, lurking just beyond the visible horizon. On the bridge of the guided missile destroyer USS Barry, the mood was one of routine professionalism. Officers monitored their consoles, their faces bathed in the soft green glow of radar screens. They tracked commercial shipping, monitored weather patterns, and kept a vigilant watch. The ship was a silent guardian, a steel sentinel accompanying its charge, the oil tanker USNS Liberty Sentinel. The mission was simple: ensure the tanker and its vital cargo reached their destination safely. Yet, every sailor understood the unspoken weight of their task. They were not just escorting a vessel, they were projecting American resolve in one of the world's most volatile regions. The calm was a mask. It hid the complex web of surveillance and counter-surveillance that defined modern naval operations. Satellites passed silently overhead, their electronic eyes peering down from the cold vacuum of space. Undersea sensors listened for the acoustic signatures of submarines. On distant shores, powerful radar arrays swept the skies. The peace was not real. It was merely an absence of open hostilities. It was the deep, quiet breath a predator takes before it strikes. And on this particular morning, the predator was closing in, unseen and unheard, preparing to shatter the calm with fire and steel. Strategic importance. At 8:40 a.m., the fragile calm was broken by a single ominous alert. On the bridge of the USS Barry, a radar operator noted a new contact appearing on his screen. It was a surface vessel, moving fast from the east. Initially, it could have been any number of commercial or fishing vessels that populated these busy sea lanes. But its speed and vector were different. It was not following established shipping routes. Instead, it was on a direct intercept course with the American convoy. The atmosphere in the Combat Information Center, the nerve center of the warship, shifted instantly from routine vigilance to focused alertness. The contact was quickly identified. It was a Chinese warship, a Type 052D destroyer. This was one of the most capable vessels in the People's Liberation Army Navy, often called the Chinese Aegis for its sophisticated phased array radar and vertical launch missile systems. Its sudden appearance was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. The Chinese destroyer was hunting. Its presence was a deliberate and aggressive act, a clear escalation in the simmering standoff. The ship was a gray-hulled specter of conflict, its intentions still unknown, but its potential for hostility immense. The American commanders on the USS Barry immediately initiated standard protocols. They attempted to establish communication with the Chinese vessel over standard maritime radio channels, hailing it and requesting it to state its intentions. The calls were met with an unnerving silence. The Chinese destroyer did not respond. It simply continued on its course, closing the distance with a steady, menacing resolve. This refusal to communicate was a chilling signal. In the unwritten rules of naval encounters, silence is often a prelude to aggression. The American crew knew they were no longer just in a tense situation. They were facing a direct and imminent threat. The Chinese destroyer maintained its course, a silent gray shadow against the blue expanse. Its sleek profile grew larger on the horizon, a physical manifestation of the geopolitical storm that had been brewing for years. On the USS Barry, sailors moved with a quiet urgency, their training taking over. They were preparing for the worst-case scenario. The time for diplomacy and signaling was over. The hunter had revealed itself, and the American convoy was now squarely in its sights. The question was no longer if the Chinese would act, but when and how. The clock was ticking. At 9:15 a.m., with the Chinese destroyer still closing and refusing all communication, the captain of the USS Barry made a critical decision. He declared a state of emergency. The ship's general quarters alarm blared, a jarring, insistent sound that echoed through every passageway and compartment. General quarters! General quarters! All hands man your battle stations. The announcement cut through the air, a stark command that ended all routine activities. Sailors scrambled from their bunks, from the mess decks, from their workstations, sprinting toward their assigned posts. The ship was transforming from a vessel on patrol into a machine of war. Deep within the hull, in the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was electric with controlled tension. The team manning the Aegis combat system focused intently on the Chinese destroyer, their systems locked onto the threat. They were the ship's shield. Their job was to see the blow coming and stop it. Tactical data flooded their screens, showing the Chinese ship's range, bearing, and speed. They began to run simulations, preparing for every possible attack vector. The ship's powerful AN Spy-1 radar was now operating at maximum power, its electronic beams sweeping a vast dome of sky and sea, searching for the telltale sign of a missile launch. Aboard the Liberty Sentinel, the crew heard the alert relayed from their naval escort. The captain ordered his crew to prepare for impact. They were civilians caught in a military confrontation, their only defense the steel hull of their ship and the hope that the USS Barry could protect them. They donned flash hoods and fire retardant gear, sealed watertight doors, and prepared firefighting equipment. They knew their ship, filled with hundreds of thousands of barrels of flammable crude oil, was a catastrophic explosion waiting to happen. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They could only brace themselves and trust in the sailors of the U.S. Navy. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Every sailor on the USS Barry was at their post, a network of human and technological components ready to act in a fraction of a second. Gunners stood ready at the phalanx close-in weapon systems, the last line of defense against an incoming missile. The vertical launch system cells, holding dozens of standard missiles, were armed and ready to fire. The ship was a coiled spring, wound tight with anticipation and readiness. The crew waited, their eyes fixed on their screens and their ears on the communication network, listening for the one word they all dreaded: vampire, the signal for an incoming enemy missile. At precisely 9:45 a.m., the moment of truth arrived. The electronic warfare specialists aboard the USS Barry detected a massive energy spike from the Chinese destroyer. It was the signature of a fire control radar locking onto its target. Seconds later, the dreaded call echoed through the ship's communication network. Vampire, 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 multiple inbound missiles. The Chinese Type 052 Delta had unleashed its fury. It had launched a massive salvo of 12 YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles. Each missile was a technological terror, a sea-skimming weapon traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound and carrying a 450-kilogram high-explosive warhead. The Aegis combat system on the USS Barry reacted instantly, its automated processes functioning faster than any human could. The system tracked the incoming threats, calculated their trajectories, and assigned interceptors. With a deafening roar, standard missiles erupted from the destroyer's vertical launch cells, streaking into the sky on pillars of fire and smoke. They were guided by the ship's powerful radar, racing to meet the incoming Chinese missiles in a cataclysmic mid-air collision. The sky, once clear and blue, became a battleground of intersecting contrails and brilliant explosions as 10 of the 12 YJ-12s were successfully destroyed miles from the convoy. But, the attack was not over. The sheer volume of the Chinese salvo had been designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. 2 of the YJ-12 missiles broke through the defensive screen. They were now in their terminal phase, screaming toward the convoy at over 2,000 miles per hour. The USS Barry's phalanx close-in weapon systems, Gatling guns designed to shred incoming threats, spun to life, spitting a torrent of tungsten rounds. But the missiles were too fast, their approach too perfect. They were aimed not at the warship, but at the larger, softer target, the Liberty Sentinel. The first missile slammed into the tanker's starboard hull, tearing a gaping hole in the steel and sending a shock wave shuddering through the vessel. A second later, the second missile found its mark. It struck one of the massive fuel tanks midship. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. A colossal fireball erupted hundreds of feet into the air, a churning inferno of orange and black. A thick column of black smoke began to billow into the sky, a dark plume visible for over 60 miles. The Liberty Sentinel, a vessel of commerce and energy, had been transformed into a burning wreck in a matter of seconds. The immediate aftermath of the strike was chaos and devastation. On the deck of the E, the force of the explosions had been brutal. 3 American sailors were killed instantly, their lives extinguished in the fiery blast. 12 others suffered severe burns and injuries, their survival hanging by a thread as their crewmates desperately tried to administer first aid amidst the spreading fire. The tanker itself was mortally wounded. It listed heavily to one side, its internal structure compromised, its deck a twisted mass of burning metal. The mission to deliver fuel was over. The new mission was simple, desperate survival. From the bridge of the USS, the crew watched in horror as the tanker burned. The ship's rescue teams immediately sprang into action, preparing to launch small boats and a helicopter to assist the crew of the stricken vessel. But even as they mounted a rescue effort, a different kind of response was taking shape. Far away in Beijing, state commanders who had ordered the strike were receiving reports of mission accomplished. For them, the attack was a calculated act of defiance, a bloody message to Washington. They saw it as a propaganda victory, a demonstration that China could and would enforce its claims with lethal force. Washington, however, did not see a propaganda victory. It saw an act of war. The unprovoked attack on a US-flagged vessel in international waters, resulting in American deaths, crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. News of the strike flashed from the South China Sea to Pacific Command in Hawaii, and then to the Pentagon and the White House. The response was swift and unequivocal. By 10 a.m., less than 15 minutes after the missiles hit, the South China Sea was officially declared a battlefield. The diplomatic dance was over. The era of strategic patience had ended. The decision was not made lightly, but it was made with grim resolve. The attack was seen as a direct challenge to American power and credibility. To fail to respond would be interpreted as weakness, inviting further aggression. Orders were transmitted back to the USS and other U.S. assets in the region. The initial directive from U.S. Pacific Command was simple and chilling: execute immediate retaliation. The American response would not be symbolic. It would be overwhelming, precise, and devastating. The calm before the storm had given way to a tempest of violence, and now, a hurricane of retribution was about to be unleashed. Within 7 minutes of the attack on the ice, the American military machine roared to life. At Pacific Command headquarters, a pre-approved battle plan was activated, deploying over $2.5 billion in military assets. The target was chosen with cold, strategic calculation: Woody Island. This was not just some remote outpost. It was a major Chinese military hub in the Paracel Islands, a fortress boasting a long runway, advanced radar domes, powerful HQ-9 surface-to-air missile batteries, and housing for nearly 2,000 PLA Navy personnel. The island was a dagger pointed at the heart of the South China Sea. The American plan was to break that dagger. The first wave of the counterstrike was invisible. At 10:42 a.m., two EA-18G Growler aircraft, which had been scrambled from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, arrived in the operational area. These were not fighters, but electronic warfare platforms, the most advanced of their kind in the world. They activated their next-generation jamming pods, sophisticated equipment valued at $90 million. A powerful wave of electronic energy washed over the region, blanketing a 400-mile radius. Chinese radar systems on Woody Island and nearby ships were instantly blinded, their communication networks filled with static. Their eyes and ears were gone, leaving them deaf and blind to the destruction that was coming. With the Chinese defenses effectively neutralized, the second wave began its attack run. At 10:47 a.m., two B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying undetected from their base in Missouri, appeared in the skies over Woody Island. These billion-dollar aircraft were the pinnacle of stealth technology, virtually invisible to any surviving sensors. From high altitude, their bomb bay doors opened, and they released their payload 8 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. These were 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, the heaviest conventional bombs in the U.S. arsenal. Guided by GPS, they plunged toward the island's most hardened and critical targets. Simultaneously, the USS Hua, having just weathered an attack and now engaged in a rescue mission, became an instrument of vengeance. On command, the warship launched 10 Tomahawk cruise missiles from its vertical launch cells. Each missile, carrying a 1,000-pound warhead, streaked away from the destroyer at low altitude, hugging the surface of the sea to evade detection. Their targets were different from the B-2s, but no less critical. The American hammer was falling, a multi-pronged assault of electronic disruption, stealth bombing, and precision missile strikes, all synchronized to deliver a single, undeniable message of American power. The destruction on Woody Island was swift and total. The GBU-57 bunker busters from the B-2 bombers struck first. These massive weapons were designed to penetrate dozens of feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. The island's primary radar array and its main command and control center, buried deep underground, were obliterated in colossal subterranean explosions. The ground heaved as if struck by an earthquake, and the vital nerve centers of the Chinese base ceased to exist. The leadership and sensory organs of the island's defenses were wiped out in the opening seconds of the assault, leaving the remaining forces leaderless and disoriented. Moments later, the Tomahawk cruise missiles arrived. Despite the electronic jamming, the island's HQ-9 missile batteries managed to engage, a final desperate act of defiance. They successfully intercepted 2 of the incoming Tomahawks, which detonated harmlessly offshore. But it was not enough. 8 more missiles broke through. 4 of them were specifically targeted at the island's 2,700-meter runway. They struck along its length, their 1,000-pound warheads blasting massive craters over 50 feet wide. The smooth concrete surface was transformed into a fractured, impassable ruin. No aircraft could take off or land. The island's air power was trapped and useless. The remaining 4 Tomahawks slammed into the island's military port. They struck piers, fuel depots, and maintenance facilities, creating a chain reaction of secondary explosions as ammunition and fuel stores ignited. The harbor, which moments before had sheltered Chinese naval vessels, was now a scene of fire and chaos. The combined assault of stealth bombers and cruise missiles had systematically dismantled the island's ability to fight, communicate, or project power. In less than 5 minutes, one of China's most important and symbolic military outposts in the South China Sea had been rendered strategically irrelevant. The impact was far greater than just the physical destruction. The attack on Woody Island was a brutal lesson in modern warfare. It demonstrated the overwhelming technological superiority of the United States military and its ability to project devastating force across vast distances with precision and speed. The message to Beijing was clear. Your artificial island fortresses are not invulnerable, they are targets. The swiftness and ferocity of the American retaliation sent shockwaves through the Chinese military leadership. The celebratory mood of mission accomplished from just an hour earlier had evaporated, replaced by the stark realization that they had provoked a far more powerful adversary than they had anticipated. The events of September 23, 2025 marked a definitive turning point in the 21st century. The exchange of fire in the South China Sea was more than a skirmish. It was the violent end of an era of strategic ambiguity and the beginning of a new, more dangerous period of open confrontation between two global superpowers. The attack on the subsequent obliteration of the military facilities on Woody Island demonstrated how quickly a localized incident could escalate, transforming a political disagreement into a hot war. The balance of power, once a delicate dance of diplomacy and deterrence, had been shattered by a single act of aggression. The lessons learned that day were stark and sobering. For China, it was a brutal awakening. Their belief that they could control the escalation ladder and use limited force to achieve strategic goals without provoking a massive response proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. They had underestimated American resolve and the speed and lethality of its military technology. The loss of Woody Island was not just a military defeat, it was a profound national humiliation, exposing the vulnerability of their prized island bases and forcing a painful reassessment of their entire strategy in the South China Sea. For the United States, the day was a grim vindication of its doctrine of deterrence. The swift and overwhelming counterattack reaffirmed America's position as the world's preeminent military power. However, it also came at a terrible cost. The loss of American lives, the destruction of a valuable asset, and the entry into open conflict with a nuclear-armed state were consequences no one in Washington had wanted.